Welcome to Codex, History of Video Games. I'm Mike Coletta.
And I'm Tyler Osby.
And today we're doing, it's kind of a big game. This game is a big game to people. Big deal to people.
It's a big deal to people. On the scheme of games of its type, it's actually quite small.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't see. I've always heard this as being like one of those games that everyone's like, this is like a hidden gem.
Oh, it is. Absolutely. Yeah. No, that's not a comment on its quality. I just mean like in terms of size and scope.
Like people. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Who's discussing it?
Yes.
Today, we're talking about Super Mario RPG, Legend of the Seven Stars.
That's right. This is a lot of people's like first JRPG game. The reason I say it's small is because we'll get to this in the grind facts, but it's kind of a short game as far as JRPGs go. It's kind of
Wii. It's a little bit Wii.
Yeah, which makes it a really good like first JRPG. So, we're all familiar with Mario as a character. He runs, he jumps, he hits blocks, he saves the princess from Bowser. And at one point, the plumber was known by more kids than Mickey Mouse. Like if you showed like a kid in like 1990 a picture of Mickey Mouse and a picture of Mario, it was more likely that they would recognize who Mario was than Mickey Mouse. I
appreciate that. I appreciate those children. Good for you.
Yeah, me too. I don't know if it's still that way today, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was at least close. So yeah, he captured our hearts. He's one of the few franchises from that era, like back in the 80s, that's like not only still going, but is consistently a symbol of high quality games. Because there are a lot of franchises that are still going since like the 80s or early 90s. Like I think of like Sonic games, which those first few Sonic games are awesome. But yeah, there have been some stinkers in there, right? And there have been some gems along the way. But Mario has pretty much consistently been like just banger after banger. Even if you're not like quite into the genre of whatever the game Mario has been put into, you can at least recognize that like the game's not bad. Like I'm not huge on tennis games, but I recognize that Mario Tennis is cool and fun, right? Those are good tennis games. So not all these games are for me. I'm not necessarily interested in them all, but you can always count on Nintendo to put Mario into a good game. And this continues into the 90s. So in 1996, he had already been a construction worker in Donkey Kong. He'd been a plumber in Mario Bros. And I'm not talking Super Mario Bros, but he was also a plumber in Super. Yep. Mm-hmm. He had been a doctor in Dr. Mario. I'm not sure where he got his MD from, or if he ever did, or if he just put a lab coat on and said he was a doctor. That's probably illegal. He was a golfer. He was a demolition worker in Wrecking Crew. He's been a painter in Mario
Paint. Oh,
I had that like legitimately back in the day. It's pretty fun. Yeah, the music making thing was probably my favorite part.
People still make music with Mario Paint.
Yeah, it's a cool like little sequencer, and it used a lot of the iconic sounds from Super Mario games on the Super Nintendo, so you could like remix and make your own music. It was very cool. It had a really fun fly swatting minigame that I enjoyed as well. He was a race car driver. He was like just a ton of other stuff, right? But when he was in Princess Saving mode or in any other type of like real story, those were like usually saved for the mainline Super Mario Brothers games, right? Like that's his bread and butter. That's where he lived in like the main Mario games. So in the early 90s, Nintendo was crushing it. They still are crushing it, but they were then too. Little Mitch Hedberg for you. They used to be really good. They still are, but they used to too.
Yeah.
But there was also another company that was also crushing it in their respective genre, and that's Squaresoft. So by 1996, they had found their niche in the turn-based role-playing game space, which we affectionately refer to as JRPGs, especially on this show. Everybody knows how much of a JRPG fan I am. They're called that mostly due to their stylistic and gameplay differences from Western RPGs. They tend to be a little bit more turn-based, especially those earlier ones. They focus a little bit more on telling stories about specific characters, whereas in a lot of Western RPGs, you're sort of creating your own character and making your own story, or like taking sort of the player character is like an avatar for yourself to go through a story, whereas in a JRPG, generally these are characters that already exist and have thoughts and feelings of their own. And if you have choice and agency as a player in terms of the story, it's usually pretty limited. So Final Fantasy VI had released in 1994, also known as Final Fantasy III in the US. It was a huge critical success. Not everything that Square made got released in the US, especially in the late 80s, early 90s, but Final Fantasies 1, 4, and 6 had been released as 1, 2, and 3 in the US, respectively. They sold like hotcakes and gangbusters. You know the deal. So Squaresoft, they were crushing it. Nintendo, they were crushing it. And friend of the podcast, Shigeru Miyamoto, he had noticed this, that Square was crushing it. And he was pretty interested in working with them on making an RPG for Mario, because he really liked playing these RPG games. And he was like, I want to make one. But Nintendo had never made one before. And Square wanted to make an RPG that they thought would do better outside of Japan, because even though some of those Final Fantasies had been released outside of Japan, they didn't quite sell as well as they did in Japan. These are sort of niche games up until about Final Fantasy VII time. Is really when JRPG sort of exploded and got a lot more popular in the US, but they were pretty niche in the Super Nintendo days. But Mario, that dude sells out everywhere, right? So this partnership was really great for them. It was also one of the first partnerships like this that Nintendo had made. It was a pretty big deal for them to give up control over their flagship characters to another company. They do that fairly regularly now. Nintendo usually holds on to like the mainline Mario games, but most of like the sports games and the RPG games and a lot of that stuff are kind of, I don't want to say outsourced has like a negative connotation, but they are by external developers.
Well, isn't like Mario Rabbids Kingdom Battles a good example of that?
Yeah, because that's a Ubisoft game.
That's Ubisoft taking Nintendo characters and putting them with their Rabbids characters, and it works.
Yeah.
As we've talked about, we've gushed over it before.
Yeah, love it. Alpha Dream makes the Mario and Luigi series games, or made them until I think Alpha Dream doesn't exist anymore. Intelligent Systems makes made the Paper Mario games. I don't know if they still make them or not, but they definitely made the first couple of Paper Mario games. So, but this was kind of I don't want to say this was the first time this ever happened, but this was probably the highest profile that it had happened up until this point. Was Nintendo giving the keys of Mario over to Squaresoft, and they knew Mario was in good hands. Square was making great games at the time.
Giving the keys to the Mushroom Kingdom, if you will.
That's what I was looking for. That's the words I was looking for. You nailed it. Thank you, Mike.
Yeah, no problem.
So before we get into Super Mario RPG, we got to talk about the grime facts.
Let's get into it.
That's right. So it was developed by Square. I think it was maybe Squaresoft at the time. They're now known as Square Enix, but maybe it was
this
just
is
Square.
Before they merged.
Yeah, that was in like 2000, 2001. I think the first Square Enix game big one was like Final Fantasy X. Maybe that was still Squaresoft. I know the first Kingdom Hearts was Squaresoft. So 10 must not have been then. The first Kingdom Hearts was Squaresoft, but Kingdom Hearts 2 was Square Enix. So that's there's sort of the line for you. But anyway, they were Squaresoft in the 90s. It was published by Nintendo, of course. And it came out in Japan in March of 1996, in North America in May of 1996. So a few months before the Nintendo 64.
Not too far apart, though, which is cool.
Yeah, that's a great point, because RPGs like this, they could take years in between. There's generally a lot of text to translate. They're oftentimes, in the case of Square games, they're making them easier for the Western audience. Final Fantasy IV had like USA mode, which was like just kind of an easier mode.
For me specifically, I'm the guy they're talking about.
Yes, that's right. The average time to finish about 17 to 20 hours, according to How Long to Beat. I think that sounds about right to me when I did my playthrough on the Switch. It came out originally on the Super Nintendo. It was on the Wii Virtual Console. I think the Wii U Virtual Console as well. It's on the Super Nintendo Classic, if you got one of those. But if you're looking for just the best way to experience this game, that is very authentic, the Switch remake is really, really, really good. I think it's worth checking out the Super Nintendo version just so you can see what they did with the hardware at the time. Because it's not even the Switch remake is like not technically very impressive today, although it looks way better than the Super Nintendo version. It is fun to like go and see like, oh, geez, this is what they were able to do with the Super Nintendo hardware. But the Switch version is better. It's a lot smoother. It's widescreen, of course. They add some gameplay stuff that are really fun. They add some they're not limit breaks, but they work sort of like limit breaks do in a Final Fantasy game, like some super ultimate moves. And just like lots of quality of life things. So I would play it on the Switch if you're looking for it, unless you want to get super authentic. And then of course you can play the Super Nintendo version in whichever version you prefer. And it is short enough that you can beat it in a single sitting, as my younger brother once did.
Wow.
Him and a friend, I probably told the story before on the podcast, but he and his friend, they had purchased it on the Wii Virtual Console, and they also had a physical copy for the Super Nintendo, and they just like sat side by side on two different TVs and just played through the whole thing together in one sitting.
That's a lot. That's awesome, though. That's a lot.
So it's a really, really good RPG to play as your first one, again, because it's sort of simplified. It's got all your favorite Mario characters in it, so it's very accessible in that way. And it's not super duper long, so it's not like a huge commitment to get to the end. Like if you wanted to play a Final Fantasy VII, which I would argue is also a pretty good entry point. That's a long game, though. That's like 50 hours, right? This game is
big commitment.
Yeah.
It's what scares me about Persona.
Those games are long, man. I want to do another Persona 5 playthrough because I still have never played Royal, but I know that game that was 90 hours on my playthrough, of not Royal, and the Royal stuff is like 30 or 40 more hours.
Oh man, dude, that's crazy.
Yeah, someday I'll play through it. Maybe we'll do a stream or something. We play through it together. But yeah, those
Yeah,
games are long. I put 60, 70 hours into Persona 3 Reload.
that's how long it took to beat 2? 60?
Yeah, Persona 3.
Mhm.
Yeah. So anyway, this is a really good first RPG if you're not sure you like RPGs. So let's talk about the development of this game. Miyamoto was no stranger to genres outside of the platformer. This man pioneered so many genres, influenced so many games we still play today. I mean, I don't need to tell you about Super Mario Brothers, Legend of Zelda, Donkey Kong, all this stuff. Come on, we all know. And he still makes games. He still makes great games. But he knew when to ask for outside help when it was something he'd never done before, or maybe he just didn't have the time to really crack it. He was probably in the middle of the 90s. This dude was probably working on all kinds of stuff, and he was probably like, you know, what would be cool? A JRPG. We should get somebody on that, and then they just made it happen. You know. Square was a natural choice, obviously, given their success with RPG games in the past. And they had a close working relationship with Nintendo because their biggest games, the Final Fantasy games and the Dragon Quest games, had all been released. Well, I guess Dragon Quest wasn't Square, it was Enix. So they would eventually be Square games, but they're not right now. I guess they were fierce competitors. So, yeah. But they had a pretty close working relationship with Nintendo because all of their big games had been released on the NES and the Super Nintendo. And I think that probably made Nintendo very comfortable with the idea of letting another company make a game using its characters. Each team brought their own strengths to the table. Nintendo focused on the character design, core gameplay concepts. They wanted to make sure that that Mario's world retained its signature charm. We're talking about the Mushroom Kingdom here. That's kind of one of their babies. They wanted to make sure that nobody was taking it in a direction that didn't make sense for it, especially in the RPG genre, because these stories get pretty deep. They can get pretty intense too. Like Final Fantasy games deal with some dark stuff at times, and they probably didn't really want a lot of that in a Mario game. Although Mario RPG does explore some stuff in the storyline that could be considered a little more mature. I mean, this is still, I guess it was probably rated kids to adults in 1996. So it's not like really diving deep, but darker than what a normal Super Mario game would cover. So Nintendo wanted to make sure that they sort of had control over that stuff because they didn't want a teen rated Mario RPG game. Let's just put it that way.
They're like, we're either going E for everyone or all the way mature with Mario. Those are the only two options.
That's right. Oh man, an M-rated Mario game.
That'd be hilarious. It's just like a Mario. They already have a Mario Doom mod.
Yeah, that's true. Well, and he is in Metal Gear Solid: The Twin Snakes briefly on
that is
Otacon's desk. So
that's true.
That's rated M for mature.
And you got to shoot that Yoshi so it refills your health bar. Just throwing it out there.
And he goes, Yoshi. You shoot him. Yeah. So let me find where I was in our notes here because we went way off.
Distracted by Metal Gear.
I got distracted by Metal Gear. So the collaboration here did bring some interesting innovations to the JRPG genre. They introduced some real-time action-focused mechanics that were inspired by Mario platformer games. So for instance, like the overworld has like real kind of platforming sections. They're kind of challenging. They're challenging not necessarily because they're like these well-designed, cool platforming puzzlers, more because of the camera angle they chose. This is an isometric game, which is cool, looks cool for an overworld. When you try to do a platformer, it's hard to judge depth.
You're going to have a bad time. Yeah.
So there are some platforming sections where you're just like, please just let this be over. Like, this is not fun. Like, I'm fighting. The game isn't hard because you've made a challenging game that's like satisfying to figure out. The game is hard because I literally can't tell the distance between these two things based on the camera angle. And so I'm just guessing until I get it right, which is not always fun. But there's not too much of that stuff. It's not that frustrating. Just occasionally you'll be like, okay, can we please be done with this?
Yeah.
When you retry to jump for like the 5th time, you're like, oh, can we please be done with this?
Yeah.
But those platforming with those camera angles was not always fun. Remember Sonic 3D Blast? Which kind of tried to do it wasn't an RPG, but it tried to do this like isometric platforming thing with a similar graphic style.
Doesn't work.
No,
doesn't work at all.
Sonic
Honestly,
was like
this is not isometric, but the older first-person shooter games of the 90s had platforming in them, and it's not fun.
Yeah,
and I'm even including Half-Life in this. The original Half-Life, when you go to Zen, it's not enjoyable. It feels more like a burden than anything.
Yeah. You see a platforming section and you don't go, ooh, can't wait to solve this puzzle. And you go, oh, can't wait for this to be over.
Exactly.
And not very many games have nailed that. I want to say, I think Metroid Prime did okay with that. I think Mirror's Edge is a game that was built around that idea of like first person platforming. So I think it's pretty good. And some of the frustration in Mirror's Edge is a little intentional because you're parkouring and it's kind of you're supposed to be like you're what you can see is limited sort of on purpose.
Yeah, it's kind of funny too because in Destiny and Destiny 2, the jumping puzzles, I know some people just hate that part. They just hate those
Yeah.
parts of the raids. They're just like, why are we doing this?
Yep. Yeah, they're fun when you can get them. When you are
Mhm.
dying to the same spot over and over again, you're like, this is okay.
You're just like, why are we even doing this anymore?
Yeah, like the Deepstone Crypt, like the Deepstone Lullaby is such a good song, so I don't mind dying over and over. But man, that platforming segment is tough.
You die to that sweet sullen soundtrack. It's fine.
Yeah. Oh, and I always think of I think it's Eater of Worlds, that raid lair that's not even in the game anymore, where you had the platforming section where you could only have like one person on a platform at a time. And if one person messed up, they all sunk into the ground and like everybody died. And you're just like, oh. So not only did we need to perfectly execute this platforming in a way that's not fun, all 6 of us need to execute this perfectly or we all die. And it was.
Yeah, I think as you can tell, we should do an episode just on platforming and when it works and when it doesn't.
Yeah.
That would not be a bad idea because there's some bad examples out there.
Yeah. But some of the real-time stuff that did work out really well was the stuff that they brought to the actual battles themselves. So almost every move that the player can perform in this game has some sort of corresponding button hit that they need to do, usually like just pressing A at the right time before the strike happens to increase the damage, which is really fun. And it makes every choice like sort of like have a moment of like, oh, I've made my strategic decision and now I need to execute it as well. In a way that feels good for a Mario game, because that Mario is all about like tactical execution of like the jumps and stuff like that. So having that a little bit of that in the RPG is really cool. You can also block damage if you hit the button at the right time. You can reduce the damage if you hit it perfectly. On many abilities, you can block the damage altogether, which is really cool. So if you get really, really good at that, you can go through without having to invest very much in your defense stats, and you can use like just offensive stats to just do tons and tons of damage. And some of for boss fights, like being able to block this damage or mitigate it entirely is almost required. Like they get pretty hard. And being able to recognize when that button press is going to be, because it isn't just like press A now. It's like you have to sort of look for, okay, this is the point in this. There's some trial and error involved, like knowing when this particular move you have to hit the button or else you're going to mess it up. So it's really cool. And as you do that in the remake on the Switch, as you do that, you build up your sort of limit break meter. So you're rewarded even further for nailing these, and it goes up faster if you can hit more and more of them in a row.
That's really cool. Yeah, it makes it so you're not just, because that's sometimes like a thing with me about JRPGs is you're just kind of sitting there watching it play out, and it's like, all right, it just like it's hard, but that's a cool mechanic that they added to this.
And it makes even the trash fights a lot more fun, because I think it's balanced in such a way that like for a lot of the trash fights, like if you are nailing it on the timing, you're beating the guys in one hit. So that's like really satisfying to like not even have to worry about taking damage in the like normal trash fights. But if you don't nail it, it's going to take you 2 tries. And so you'll probably take some damage in between, or you'll have to block that damage. So you are rewarded for these timed button presses by saving time. And it's just more fun. It's cool. It's a neat innovation. And I think not enough games do that. I think recently the game Sea of Stars did a really good job of incorporating that kind of thing. And I think it was even more fun in Sea of Stars because they incorporate a lot of other real-time stuff of like some DDR mechanics and like having to like hit buttons in a certain order. And like it was really well done. I really like Sea of Stars. So yeah, it's a very competent turn-based RPG system. You got your regular attacks, you got your hammer stuff, you have abilities that use a resource that is kind of hard to come by. So it's pretty cool. And then you've got a bunch of characters. You have 3 characters can be out at any one time. One of them always has to be Mario, but you also got so you got Mario, Peach, who is called Toadstool in the Super Nintendo version. You've got Mallow, who is like a cloud marshmallow thing, who thinks he's a frog and then figures out, because he grew up with frogs, he figures that out. That's a whole storyline for him. A character called Gino, who's like this sort of ancient like fighting god character who inhabits a puppet. And has never come back in any Mario game ever. And I really want I would play a Gino only game.
Yeah, that makes me happy that they have these weird characters they threw in there.
Yeah, those are like the unique characters to this story. And then Bowser, like he's on your team. You fight with Bowser because he's pretty mad that the Mushroom Kingdom is being threatened by this giant sword. We'll get into the story a little bit in a second. But like Bowser's like, wait a minute, this is my kingdom to like terrorize and conquer. And so I'm going to join forces with Mario and get these guys out of here so that I can be the bad guy.
I
He's
love
like
it.
jealous. Which is a recurring theme in a lot of these Mario RPG games, is that Bowser is like jealous of some new bad guy and is like, okay, I'm joining forces with Mario so that I can be the bad guy. Which is a funny, like, there's like this theory, or I don't know if it's ever been confirmed, but like this meta theory that Mario games they're all stage plays, of course, which some games lean very heavily into the stage motif, and that these characters are all like friends afterwards. And that's why they play tennis together and go kart racing together. And so Bowser being upset that there's a new bad guy is like threatening to him, almost like outside of the story of these games. You know, he's like, wait a minute, that's my role in the story of these games. You can't have somebody else coming in here and doing that, which is like, yeah, I just find it kind of fascinating.
It's fun. I mean, it was confirmed pretty much by Miyamoto in Super Mario 3 that it was a play. Like that's so it's not even a surprise anymore to it. And I think that's really fun.
Yeah, and Mario, Paper Mario games lean really heavily into that. The first one does, of course. Then Thousand Year Door. I mean, there's an audience in the battle scenes in Thousand Year Door, so they know what they're doing, you know.
Filmed in front of a live studio audience.
Yeah, so I love the idea that like most of these Mario stories are all just like fake stories that we put on for whoever the audience is, I guess us, and then they're otherwise outside of that, they're like friends playing tennis and having parties and
go-kart racing,
racing,
golfing. I love it.
And Bowser's still kind of a bad guy even in those things, but like it's all in good fun. It's almost like wrestling, you know, where it's like the bad guys are bad guys outside of the ring, but you know that it's like still all storyline, that like secretly they're all friends, but like they can't show that outside, you know, that kind of stuff.
They're a bad guy, but they're not a bad guy.
That's right. That's right. So yeah, so that brings us to the story here of Super Mario RPG. And it kind of begins with like this familiar setup of like, oh, Mario's got to go rescue Princess Peach, Toadstool and Super Nintendo Peach in the remake. So he goes to rescue her from Bowser. During their confrontation in Bowser's castle, this giant sword called Exor just like crashes into the castle. It shatters the Star Road, which is very important for making wishes. And it scatters the 7 magical star pieces across the world. Oh, the legend, the stars of which the legend is told. It sort of throws Mario, Bowser, and Toadstool out of the castle. And Mario sets out to recover the star pieces so he can repair the Star Road, which allows wishes to be granted. And so right now, no wishes are being granted. So when people wish upon a star, there's no stars to wish upon. Nobody's getting their wishes. It's very sad.
That's very sad.
Yeah. So along the way, he runs into a bunch of really fun people. We got Mallow, this like cloud guy who thinks he's a tadpole again, but later discovers that he's not. And of course, to all of us watching this, we're like, you are clearly not a frog. But he seems to think he is. Gino is that warrior spirit. He's from Star Road. And he sort of takes over this puppet, and he wants to recover the star pieces, obviously, because that's like his home. That's where he's from. He wants to be out here granting wishes. So they fight against the forces of Smithy, which is the like leader of this weapon manufacturing army that has taken over Bowser's castle, and they want to replace everybody with a mechanical version of themselves as like robots want to take over. Classic story, right?
Classic Mario. Is this like the kind of mechanical things that have like the wind-up toy backs and stuff like that? Yeah, they love wind-up toy stuff in Mario.
They sure do. So they go through lots of different kingdoms. We solve a lot of puzzles. We defeat bosses. Eventually, we collect all the star pieces. We confront Smithy in his factory. We beat him. Of course, it's a Mario game. Good guys win. Star Road gets repaired. Spoilers. And then the wishes can be granted once more. There's like a parade at the end. It's all very fun. And it's a pretty straightforward story. There's not really twists and turns are not really a thing. It's pretty funny. Like this game leans heavily into humor, which is something that both the Paper Mario and the Mario and Luigi series would run with later on, especially the Mario and Luigi series. That game, those games are like legitimately pretty funny games. So yeah, it's not the greatest story in the whole world, which you now know is Metal Gear Solid because you played Metal Gear Solid and you're working on Metal Gear Solid too.
It's true. I think I'm all in. We'll talk about it in a bit.
We'll talk about that. Yeah. It punches above its weight for like what's sort of baby's first JRPG. And I think it's the most in-depth story the Mario franchise had seen up to that point. Later Mario RPGs would go deeper into their own lore. I'm thinking especially Thousand Year Door is like kind of held up as like a masterpiece of this style of game for Mario. But yeah, it's a story that works. It's fun. The game's great. And they did some fun stuff with the visuals too. So after Final Fantasy 3 or 6 in the US, the Super Nintendo was starting to look a little aged. It was getting kind of old. The Nintendo 64 was right around the corner. It had promised 3D polygon goodness. Seemed like it was going to add a whole new level of immersion to games. And you'll notice this in a lot of games towards the end of the Super Nintendo's lifespan. I think of this as kind of like an extinction burst almost. A lot of games come out that take advantage of these newer tools, a lot of them made by SGI, to like make detailed 3D polygon models, but then they would convert those models to sprites. So it would give these games like this sort of 3D animated look without actually having to make a Super Nintendo render polygons, because the Super Nintendo did not have any polygon capabilities on its own outside of what like the Super FX chip could do in like Star Fox and stuff like that. So thinking games like Donkey Kong Country, Killer Instinct, Mortal Kombat also sort of pioneered this. Mortal Kombat was more like real photos of people, but they all sort of pioneered this, like, let's get our sprite data from somewhere else and like convert it into a format that works on Super Nintendo, and that gives us like a really cool art style, especially for the time. It looks a little aged now because you're like, ooh, like especially Mortal Kombat, you're like, this didn't scale up very well. But at the time, it was so cool, and we were all waiting for the Nintendo 64. So having anything at all to sort of tide us over, I would say some of these games look even better than what was available on the Nintendo 64. Like I think Donkey Kong Country looks better.
Oh
like,
yeah.
it looks better than Donkey Kong 64 does.
Donkey Kong Country is just still a beautiful game, I think. I think that art style still very much holds up.
Yes, I agree. So they did that for Super Mario RPG. And then to show off that style in the most impressive way, they orient the camera isometrically to sort of give this illusion of 3D character movement, which makes the platforming stuff pretty difficult. So that plus the 3D models almost made this feel like a next generation game, and what like a harbinger of what people could expect the Nintendo 64 to have. And it delivered on a lot of those promises, and it didn't deliver on all of them. I think some of the Super Nintendo games actually look better. Like I just said, they look better than their Nintendo 64 counterparts, although there are a lot of great looking games on the Nintendo 64 too. So the 64 came out about a month after the US release of this game. So in Japan, it came out a month after the US release. So this was kind of one of like the last hurrahs of the Super Nintendo before the 64 was out. And that was where all the focus went. I also like the aesthetic that they chose here beyond just the 3D models. They sort of made everything in the game have this like toy-like quality. Like if you look at the cover of the game, like they kind of look like dolls on the front. And that's what like intrigued me as a kid. I was like, whoa, this is like Super Mario, but he's like a toy. That's really interesting. And there's a part in the game where they kind of make fun of this, where like Mario pretends to be a toy version of himself. To like, there's like a sneaking section where he has to like, pretend that he's a toy, and it's pretty funny because he actually looks like the toy version of himself because that's the art style.
Yeah.
So I think as a kid, I like rented this game one time thinking I was going to get like a Mario game that just had this art style to it. And I didn't really get it. I was probably 6 or 7 at the time. Like it just didn't really click for me of like what was happening in this game. I just remember kind of being like, I don't know what this is, and I'm confused.
I'm scared.
And I'm scared. So I don't think I stuck with it. And it took me a long time to actually kind of understand what was going on here. And then it was another probably 2 decades before I played the game myself. Like I had played it in a little bit at times, like when I was setting up an emulator or something, I checked it out. But I didn't really commit to it until the Switch remake. And again, Switch remake, really, really good. So that version of the game upgrades all the visuals, keeps the aesthetic intact. I'm sure that there are people out there that will tell you the Super Nintendo version is the best version. And it is true that there's a certain charm to like these advanced graphics techniques being used on aging hardware that you just can't quite replicate on hardware that can actually do the thing that they're trying to do. And like, you wouldn't want to pretend you couldn't do the thing on the, you know what I mean? Like that's just weird too. So it's one of those things that like really only works in the context of like knowing what hardware you're playing it on. Cause you're like, this is really impressive for Super Nintendo. Not impressive for anything else, but they do keep that art style intact. And I think it looks really good on the Switch. It also has really, really great music. RPGs often have relied on music heavily to help convey the stakes and the emotions in their stories. I mean, this is just a storytelling technique that movies use too. And so in games that are really story heavy, music is oftentimes really, really important to helping tell that story and eliciting those emotions. Square was really good at this. Final Fantasy VI had come out a couple years before, had just an amazing soundtrack. I can still hear like Terra's theme in my head from Final Fantasy VI. If you know, you know. Now it's playing in your head. Sorry about that, but I'm not sorry. There's a mount in Final Fantasy 14 that when you mount up on the Magitech mount, it plays Terra's theme while you're going. So that's where I think of the Final Fantasy 14 version of that song. So Mario RPG, of course, has a great soundtrack because they knew how important this kind of stuff was. It was composed by Yoko Shimomura, who had worked on a number of games before Mario RPG. I'm talking Street Fighter 2, Live Alive, Front Mission. She has credits on all those games. She did a bunch more other games too. She also would go on to do the Kingdom Hearts games. She still does. Even Kingdom Hearts 4 is going to be done by her. She did a really, really great job of blending some original compositions in with all of these classic Mario themes. Like sometimes I will have heard a song in the game in Mario RPG for a long time, and I didn't realize that it was like a rearrangement of a classic Mario song. So next time you fire this game up, the very first cutscene that plays that like shows Princess Toadstool being captured and stuff, the music that's playing during that sounds like it's probably like an original Mario RPG thing. Listen closely. It's the overworld theme from Super Mario 3.
Oh.
It's like slowed down. It's played with different instruments. It sounds a little different, but the melody is the overworld theme from Super Mario 3.
Kind of like when movies like you take like the Jurassic Park theme and they'd slow it down and change it in the newer Jurassic Park movies. Oh geez.
Yeah. And if you hear it, you go, that's the thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, it took me like 3 decades to realize that that was what was happening here. And that's really happening throughout the game. Sometimes it's more noticeable than others, but it's really, really cool. Every character gets their own theme too. So I gotta say, Shimomura really cooking on this soundtrack. In the Switch remake, you can play with the original chiptune versions, or you can play with like rearranged, sort of updated versions. I usually played with the updated versions because they're really, really good. But the chiptunes hold up very, very well. Like they still sound great. So either way is the correct way to play this game.
That's great. That makes me happy that they really took the time for the quality music in this game.
Yeah. So that kind of brings us to like where the legacy of this game, like what did it set up for? What has happened since this game that we can say we're influenced by it? And I think this game has a really, really long reaching arm out into the rest of video games. I think it pioneered Mario's foray into story-based RPG games, of which there are a dozen now, probably, maybe not quite that many, but
yeah.
Let's see, there's probably like 4 or 5
Paper Mario's RPG also, right?
Yeah. The later ones, I think that you're stretching the definition of RPG a little bit, but I am not super familiar with them. But I know that's like a criticism of like Super Paper Mario and Color Splash and some of the later ones. Mm-hmm. They get less and less RPG. But the Mario and Luigi games get more and more RPG. So they're filling in their niche here.
They're like swapping places.
Yeah. I think that like the new characters that got introduced were so cool. I wish that they would bring back Gino and Mallow because they're so fun.
You've sold me on them. Yeah. Like I've never even played this game and I am sold now. I want Gino and Mallow stuff.
Yeah. And maybe they like there's rights issues. Maybe those are Square characters now. And so Square owns, I don't know if they've ever appeared in any other games, but certainly not any other Mario games, which is kind of a bummer. I want to play as Gino in Mario Tennis. Yeah, so they're great. In terms of gameplay, I think it carved out kind of its own little niche within JRPGs, something a little bit more interactive while still allowing for the same level of strategic depth that a lot of people that play these games love. So it gives you unlimited time to plan your moves out. You're considering which move do I want to do here? What are they weak to? All that kind of stuff. But then once you choose the move, now you got to like lock in and like hit the button at the right time in order to make sure that you maximize your damage output and get the full effect, which I think is a really cool way of like dividing up the strategy with the execution in the tactics. And some of those button presses are really hard to do. And then the later Mario and Luigi games have like some really complicated like brothers moves where they're like doing stuff together and you have to like really balance like which buttons you're hitting and you got to hit the right ones. It gets pretty intricate later on.
Playing DDR with your hands?
A little bit. Yeah, kind of are. And Paper Mario also takes that into account too, where you can like block damage and all that kind of stuff. It's kind of a bummer that Super Mario RPG never got a sequel of its own. I think that a lot of that can be attributed to like the deterioration of Square's relationship with Nintendo once the PlayStation had come out and showed Square that they could achieve like what they wanted to do in terms of storytelling better than the N64 could. I mean, look at all those pre-rendered backgrounds in Final Fantasy VII, the music, like CD quality music in these games, like the full motion video stuff that really helps tell those stories. Like it just couldn't do it on the Nintendo 64.
So it's kind of like is the term swan song, like the final act of the Nintendo Square relationship was this game?
Yeah, for sure. At least in those days. I mean, I think the next Final Fantasy game that came out on a Nintendo platform was Crystal Chronicles on the GameCube. Like Square just sort of fully skipped over the Nintendo 64 in favor of the PlayStation. So this was kind of their swan song, which is why it never got its own like direct sequel, even though they had announced a Super Mario RPG 2. And in fact, if you look at some older issues of like Nintendo Power, you can see that Super Mario RPG 2 is on like the top of the like most anticipated list. That game would eventually become Paper Mario. Mm-hmm. Which would go in a different direction aesthetically, while still retaining some of the turn-based RPG mechanics. Paper Mario, that's a great game too, which I would love to talk about at some point because I played that recently, the very first one.
And I started playing it on the N64 emulator on Switch.
Yeah, it's really, really good. Like I really loved it.
I don't know how much the cart costs. I'm going to mute myself and look it up while you keep going.
Yeah, it's a good game. So while Square didn't make any sequels to this, it did spawn those two spiritual successor series, each focused kind of on their own niche. The Paper Mario series, which, like I said, started out as Mario RPG 2. That one came out towards the end of the Nintendo 64's life cycle, and has gotten a new entry on every Nintendo home console since. Then you've got the Mario and Luigi series, which also spans every handheld that Nintendo has put out. The first one came out on the Game Boy Advance, and then further games came out on the DS and 3DS. And the first one has a remake on the 3DS, Superstar Saga. And I think the second one also has a remake on the 3DS. And then the new one, Brothership, which is out like today, I think, probably by the time people are listening to this, it's like, or it came out soon. I can't remember exactly what day it comes out. That's on the Switch, which I'm excited to play. I want to play all the other ones first, even though I know the stories don't really connect. I still want to get the jokes if they make jokes, you know?
Yeah, Paper Mario's $66, by the way, loose price.
Okay,
which isn't, I mean, compared to what I'm going to talk about in the What You've Been Playing segment, it's not that bad.
Yeah. I can't wait to hear about that. Yeah, so I want to go into all these games in the future because I'm playing through Mario and Luigi Superstar Saga on the 3DS right now. I'm really enjoying it. It's been a little slow for me just because I've been doing some other stuff in terms of game playing, but that's the one that I'm playing when I get some time to play. For Square, this game has pretty lasting legacy because it showed them the potential of working with another company's IP to create a new and resonant game that would appeal to people who might not have liked that kind of game before. Final Fantasy, very serious business. That kind of turns off some casual players, but Mario's RPG with its cuteness and accessibility would show an entire generation of players that RPGs could be fun for them. So Square would go on to do another similar thing with Disney and the Kingdom Hearts series, which we have talked about on this show before, and I hope to talk about again. And I would say the Kingdom Hearts series probably more successful than the RPG series, Mario RPG, at least the first game.
I would think so, because there were like non-video game people I knew that played Kingdom Hearts.
Yeah,
like Disney people played Kingdom Hearts. You know,
that's
what I mean?
right.
So
yeah, Mario. Square learned that like, oh, if you bring in characters that are not like brand new bespoke characters for this game that people love, maybe more people will play it. And then of course it doesn't get much better than Disney in terms of that. So there are a lot of people that have played Kingdom Hearts that's the only game they've ever played. And that's a surprisingly deep action RPG game. Like that's not a game for non-gamers, if you ask me. So people who played Kingdom Hearts and loved it but didn't play other games, maybe you should check out other games because you probably are a video game player. So yeah, I think Mario RPG's legacy is one of innovation, bridging genres, setting the stage for a whole new couple of beloved series to come. It showcased the power of combining franchises, new gameplay mechanics, and it showed us that like even established characters like Mario could thrive in completely new genres. And I think it resonates with fans for generations. These are all great games, and like I said, I really want to continue covering them because I just love them, and they're kind of new to me because, like I said, the Mario RPG, the first time I played it was only a few months ago on the Switch remake. So these are as a lover of JRPG games, these are a series that have kind of fallen off my radar because I didn't really get it when they were first brand new, and I just never sort of circled my way back to it. So
yeah. I missed these too. I did not play them at all. So I completely missed out on these, which is a bummer.
They're so good. So
They're
you
so
should. And
good.
they're really not that long as far as RPGs go. Like they're not super long games.
Yeah, I mean, it's not now that I know there's a Switch remake too. I definitely would consider it, especially if it's like 20 hours. A Switch remake that's like probably just as long as Zelda is, honestly, the new Zelda. So,
Mhm.
and I still haven't beaten that yet, but
Oh, that's great.
so
Yep.
I'm working. I'm working on another game with you. So should we just
Ooh,
get
that's
into
right.
it?
Yeah,
Should we get
Mike,
into
what
the
you been
segment?
playing?
Okay, so I've been playing a lot of Metal Gear Solid 2 Sons of
Metal Gear.
Liberty. Metal Gear. And yeah, I'm all in. It's a ridiculous thrill ride in the way that I like when games we were talking about this and I'm like trying to write something on it right now, but like a thing that's like when games feel like a Disneyland ride. And
Mhm.
I think Metal Gear Solid does a good job of that, but it does it in its cutscenes in a way more than like other games do. Cause it is straight up like you're playing for like a minute and then there's like a 3 minute cutscene. And then you're
Mhm.
playing for like another minute and then there's a long cutscene. It's just cutscene. And it's doing the whole tell not show thing, but it still works in my mind.
Yeah.
And the bad guys are ridiculous. He's a vampire. There's a vampire that I thought got shot in the head, but he's fine because he's already died once, as he says.
Yeah. And
And
everybody knows if you died once, you can't die again. That's double jeopardy.
exactly. And I met the other Solid Snake. That's where I'm at in the game right now. I'm probably about halfway through Metal Gear Solid 2, or a
Yeah.
little under half, you were saying.
I think a little under half, yeah.
And then I've been playing a lot of Control in my own time, and I'm really liking Control. I started playing it for Halloween because I played Alan Wake 1, and I'm like, I'm gonna go right into Control. It's on
Yeah, it's
Game
kind of
Pass.
spooky. It's a little
And it's
paranormal
definitely kind
spookiness.
of spooky. It's spooky in a different way. It's like
It's like X-Files spooky.
it's like X-Files, Fringe, those kind of
Yeah.
shows. It's taking a lot from things like SCP, like the internet phenomenon SCP, like the internet.
Mhm.
I will call it a group creative writing project that is SCP that I like, and I love that. So, like, I hit a room, like I finally hit the prison where they keep all the contained objects that are like magical objects, right?
Mhm.
And there's a guy that has to like sit and watch an object, and I'm like, that's straight from SCP. They just lifted that straight up from SCP, which is fine because it's a good story thing too, and so it's fun. And yeah, I've been really digging that. But the big news is, and I might have to mute my screen here for a second. I don't want to like. I'm gonna
You don't want to
just do.
spoil it, so
I'm gonna do a
if you're watching
reveal.
the video, Mike just turned his camera off because he's gonna do a big reveal here. If you're just listening, sorry, you just have to listen to me get it together while Mike finds his
No,
big
I'm
reveal
here
item.
still. I'm here still audio wise. I just
Okay,
wanted to
good.
take really what I'm doing is taking the price tag off of it because I don't want people to know that part. I got it, everyone. I got my holy grail. I have Snowboard Kids too. I purchased it
Oh.
in real life with for an amount of money that I don't want to talk about on this podcast. If you want to know, I'll tell you on Discord. It's not, I will not put it out, but I saw this copy at a store called Reset in Bellingham, and it was like way overpriced from what I wanted to pay. And then I went back to Reset, and it went down to a more reasonable level.
But
Still
still
a
pretty
lot,
ridiculous.
still pretty ridiculous. But I was like, I have never seen it in the wild, and I've got every single game store I go to, I look for it, and I could never find it. So
It looks like it's in great condition too.
it's in really good shape too. Like I paid about $20 over price charting. That's kind of what I paid. But I'm supporting a local game store. The label is in amazing shape. Like the whole cartridge is in great shape. Like it's really nice. And the heartbreaking part of it is I said I would like to buy Snowboard Kids too. And the guy there opened the case and was like, that was mine. That was like my childhood game that I'm selling. And I could
Dang.
tell like a part of it was just like hurtful, but I'm like, I swear it's going to a good home. I'm going to take so much care of this. You have no idea. It is
Don't
going to
delete
the
their
person
save
that's going
file.
to care about it the most. Okay.
That's right.
So,
Don't delete their save file. Is it? I feel like the original game saved to controller pack, so maybe
so
it's
the
not.
first game saved a controller pack. I actually haven't tried this out yet. I haven't had time to plug it in because I really want to like spend some time with it and like sit down and play it. And
Mhm.
I haven't turned it on yet, but I believe if it's anything like the Japanese version, which I also have, it saves to the cartridge for this one.
Oh yeah,
So I would
I
bet
would
it
bet
saves
that
to
it
the
does.
cartridge. But yeah, it's in really nice shape, and I spent way too much money on it. There's also a book that just came out called The Ultimate Guide to the N64, and it has like every single game that's ever been published, and
Oh
like
wow.
a bunch of like every controller type that's been published. It's this anthology kind of collector's thing. And I was looking at that book, and that book's also like $70, but I want it because it's like it archives every single game.
Yeah.
Which is kind of crazy. And every single game, every single console variation, every single controller variation, like
There's
it's
more than one console variation. I mean, I guess.
well,
Like
I
the
guess like
colors.
colors,
Okay.
like not very console variation, but color variation of the shell. But it documents all that stuff, and I thought that was really cool. So yeah, but I finally have it, and I'm looking at it right now, and yeah, the pins look good too. Like I'm just
Wow.
so excited.
Is it the most expensive N64 game you own?
Yes, I believe so. I believe it is because all the ones I had as a kid, while up there, are not nearly as pricey as this one. And this is considered one of the harder ones to find. I don't
Mhm.
think it's necessarily, even though it's expensive, it's not like rare expensive. It's just pricey, but it's
Yeah.
not bad. But it's definitely the most expensive one I own. And yeah, so I'm gonna take good care of it. But that was my exciting thing. So what did you get? What have you been playing? What you been doing?
Well, most of my gaming time has been with you, just living through you vicariously because you're playing Metal Gear Solid for the first time, which I wish I could do again.
You're my game
Um,
FAQs person too. Like
yeah.
you're the person that's on GameFAQs with me, helping
Yeah,
me
well,
out.
I'm trying to help you without you having to look stuff up yourself because you could stumble into some wiki stuff that could spoil. Like I've seen some Metal Gear wiki stuff that just see it showing the picture that they show for characters. I'm like, that's a spoiler for later games, and you shouldn't see that.
Well,
So
should I put my theory out there right now? I'm gonna put my theory on the record.
okay,
I think, and I mentioned this to you while we were playing last night, I think Raiden is a clone of Liquid Snake. And I am
okay,
only saying that because he has blonde hair. That's the only reason why.
that's it. That's it. Yeah.
But I think that's what's going, because there's something going on here. There's something weird happening with Rose, his like girlfriend, and the Kodak, and why is she there? The
Mm-hmm.
Colonel's being sheepish. There's something happening, and it's not right. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm upset by it, but I want to get to the bottom of it. That's what's getting me into it. It's like, and Control also, I should mention, has the same story beats too, where it's like you don't really know what's going on, and you're piecing it together by reading certain things, and it's
Mm-hmm.
exciting. It's not nearly as anime as Metal Gear Solid is,
Yeah,
but it's
that's really the best way to describe it when people are like, how is it this weird, but it looks realistic? It's just like, it's just anime. It is an anime storyline and it goes off the rails and it's wild, but it does make sense in like where it needs to make sense. And it does have something to say,
Mhm.
especially when we get to the end of Metal Gear Solid 2. Like this game has a lot to say. So,
There's some
yeah.
meta stuff going on already.
Oh man, these are some of the most meta video games in existence.
Like you just learned to play. You just trained in VR. You think this is a video game? And it's like, but we are playing a video game. Snake.
Yeah.
I mean, Pliskin.
Yeah, and it's like when they're like, "Oh, you haven't done this for real before." Raiden's like, "But I've done all the VR stuff." And what's the VR stuff that Raiden's done? It's all the missions that Snake did in the first Metal
In
Gear.
Shadow
What's you?
Moses. Yeah.
Yeah, in Shadow Moses. What is your training to be able to play as Raiden, Mike? It's because you did.
All the stuff in the first game. Oh man. It's already starting. Here's the thing about it too, and I realized this. I think I goofed because I thought I was playing Metal Gear Solid 1, and I definitely started playing on the ship
Mm,
in 2, like in
hmm
Sons of Liberty. So like that's where I was like, I wasn't even close. So I'm glad I'm doing this with you. Because like unless I was playing some sort of weird collection where I played the ship first for some reason. I don't know why it would
It
do that.
was if you had like a demo. I think there was a demo disc of Metal Gear Solid 2 that is just the tanker chapter. So maybe you
Okay.
had that.
Maybe that's it. Maybe that's what I remember as a kid. Because I had a demo of Metal Gear Solid also. So that had to be
Yeah,
it. But
yeah.
what a fun time we've had though.
hmm
It's
Oh,
been great.
and it gets so much weirder, so much wilder.
I'm so excited. Well, thank you, Tyler. This was really good. I'm excited about Super Mario RPG also. I hope other people are as well.
Yeah,
But
you should play it. They're good
with
games.
that, things you can do if you want to email us about your Super Mario RPG experiences or opinions, you can do that at codexhistorypodcast@gmail.com. You can go to codexpodcast.net. All our links are on there, the Discord and everything. And with that, Tyler, would you like to say goodbye to everybody?
Yes, I would. Goodbye, everybody.